This series contains adult language and descriptions of graphic violence. Listener discretion is advised. Hello, listeners and friends. Maybe I'll just say listener friends. Excuse me. So it is Wednesday, which means this episode is late coming out, although I'm going to publish it as soon as I finish recording it. And I'm not going to lie. At first this morning, I was like, well, should I say I had like technical difficulties, or I don't know, I feel bad. And then two things. I had to remind myself that A, nobody's sitting with their podcast app open being like, well, where the hell is the Death by Southwest episode? And B, did I say A? Yeah, A, B.
Bored at home? Head over to Chumba Casino and join some serious social casino fun. With hundreds of games at your fingertips, no purchase necessary. You can play anytime, anywhere. There's a special welcome bonus waiting for you when you sign up. Play for fun, play for free, and you could even redeem some great prizes. Visit ChumbaCasino.com and get ready to reel in the fun. Sponsored by Chumba Casino. No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 18 plus terms and conditions apply.
If I can't be consistent, at least I can be honest. And I feel like that's one thing that I have been consistent about in this podcast, is being honest about probably too much. But that's what we're going to go with. So honestly, I didn't feel like I had this story, the Austin yogurt shop murders, which part 1 was last week. It is so, there are books, documentaries, 48 hours, episodes, hundreds and hundreds of articles. I mean, obviously this is over 3 decades ago. So there's tons of information out there. And for whatever reason, this, every so often a story will, or a case or a murder, I don't know the appropriate way to call it, will really just get me. Like I'm more interested in it than other ones that we've done. I don't really know why, but this is one of them. So when I went through my notes yesterday to record, I was like, this feels light. Like I just feel like there's a lot more. And now I maybe have put too much in to this next part, but I started saying at the end of the episodes, or I tried to start saying at the end of the episodes a while ago with Jenna, like, hopefully we did this story justice. And this story feels like one that deserves, as much information as is reasonable to include, considering that this is not the actual, like I had said last week, probably 10 times in the episode, that I want to, I potentially would love to do this story as a more scripted, like 6 episode in-depth story. So I have to remind myself that this is not that. This is still the somewhat casual, kind of not scripted at all, regular Death by Southwest episodes. But either way, I didn't feel like, as I ran through the episode before I went to record, I feel like it wasn't totally complete. And I wanted to make sure that I had everything in there that I needed. So I spent some more time on it, and I'm recording it now. And that is the truth. So there you go. I also want to apologize for the bonus episode Monday. I didn't listen to it after I recorded it, but like I said, I always second guess myself after recording, but I really was like, I feel like that episode made me sound like a lunatic, if anyone even listened to the whole thing, because it was mostly just me talking about feelings and emotions and complaining. So if you did sit through any of it, I do apologize. Also, if you did sit through any of it, I spent a lot of time talking about that video, compilation I was making for Joe and Ollie, and I spent so much time on it that I figured maybe somebody else should be able to see it, although it's not really something that I am comfortable releasing publicly. So I did put it on Patreon. So if there are any people on Patreon who haven't checked Patreon for a few days and you're looking for like an hour's worth of clips from Joe and Ollie's show, that is on our Patreon now. And I would love feedback on the video, just like the editing production of the video, if you watch it. What else? I had a few other things. I don't know. Okay, I'm going to try not to talk too long on this beginning, and we're just going to jump into the episode in a second. Happy Wednesday to everyone. I hope everyone is having a good Wednesday. I did mention on Monday that I've started walking Indiana and Henry in the morning. For all the people out there who have been following along with my with my animals in this journey, and she's been doing really well. And then that all ended today. Today there was actually a weird amount of like cars that drove through the dirt roads. I paused because have I mentioned where we walk on here or just on Patreon? I don't know. There's these dirt roads that we walk to. So like I live in a neighborhood, and if we walk out of this neighborhood and cross a main road, there's this like area in Tucson that's just, I'm sure I've mentioned it. I think it's called Richmond Heights, but all the roads are dirt. They're big plots of land, so the houses are really spread out. It just feels like you're in the middle of the city of Tucson, but it feels like you are not, like you are out in kind of like some kind of deserted desert countryside. So we walk there every day, and there's rarely cars. There's depending on what time we go. If we go at like 5:45 in the morning, we don't really see people, but usually right around 6:30, we see the same people. And then yesterday we went a little later. So we went at like 7:30 because it's not quite as hot anymore. And we didn't see anybody, which is great. But this morning we must have gone right at prime time, like 6 or 6:15. And so lots of people with dogs. There was a weird amount of cars, like 5 cars drove through there. I mean, most days I see no cars driving. Indiana is terrified of cars. Even if we're driving in the car and a bus or a truck or like a large SUV pulls up next to us or crosses the road in front of us, she ducks down in the car, in my car. This is confusing because I said car 75 times just now, but she ducks down in my car because she's terrified of cars. So she was just nervous the whole time. She lost her mind at this one dog that we walked by that Henry has seen a million times, so he was fine. She lost her mind. She's literally like barking, jumping up, spinning around and twirling. Like it's a lot. They're both big dogs. It's a lot. And then we got back to the car. So I won't cross the main road with both of them until she's better at walking, because it's a 4 or 6 lane major road. And with Henry, it's fine. He's very obedient and comfortable and not scared of cars. But she is, I just feel like it's just asking for an issue until she's a much better on a leash and whatnot. So we drive the 35 seconds from my house over to the beginning of the dirt roads. We park. And so we got back to the car, and I was like already frustrated because it's not enjoyable when you have a dog like pulling and yelping and trying to like run under the bushes when a car goes by, and no fault to her. It's my own fault for not walking her more, and walking her when she was, a baby, but it was annoying. It's not a relaxing. So I was already kind of like, come on, let's go. And then we get to the car, and my like car fob thing is like the the lock button doesn't work, hasn't for a while. The unlock button now doesn't work. It's just completely destroyed. And so it has been up until this morning. So this morning it like stopped working while I have both of the dogs. So I'm like, all right. So I go to like stick my key in and, manually unlock it. For whatever reason, that sets off the alarm. So the car alarm is just blaring. Indiana is terrified. So I get the door open. She jumps in the driver's seat because she's so scared. Fine, I let her jump in, and then I go to I close the door, go to put Henry in the back, and I wasn't aware that a guy with like a little Boston Terrier was walking behind us, walked right behind us behind my car, and Henry, who knows why? Most dogs he's fine when we walk by them, but some he loses his shit, lost his ever-loving mind at this dog, and I thought he was going to rip my arm straight out of the socket. So I yanked him. Then I tripped over my own feet as I'm trying to control him, fell to the ground, trying to get him into the car. It was just a comedy of errors, which now that I'm saying it, it's not that big of a deal. I feel like everyone should maybe sit down and explain their day out loud to strangers when they have a bad day, because it does give you some perspective to be like, wow, really wasn't that big of a deal. Why was I so upset? I sound like an asshole. All right. That's really all I have. That was my morning. It was a little frustrating, but that's okay. I actually was so frustrated. I texted Mark and I was like, I'm not walking these dogs anymore without you. I mean, that was the tone in my head, and I'm sure the tone when he read it as well. and then we've been talking forever about, Mark's been talking about it for years, wanting to do a food truck. He loves to cook. He's an excellent cook. And it's just, a less expensive and more real, kind of realistic way to, rather than starting a restaurant, that would not be something that we could do. But he's talked about it forever, and we've been talking about it now for 2 years. I have a lot of really good ideas, and I would love it. I would love to do that. Nothing would make me happier than waking up and starting to food prep, and then going out and meeting people and serving them food. I think that'd be so fun. Why did I start talking about this? Because I was so frustrated this morning, and all I wanted to do was cook, because it really relaxes me. Cooking, baking, if I'm very annoyed or irritated with something, it's kind of like cleaning. It gives me something to totally immerse myself in. So I love cleaning or organizing, because either listen, total silence, and then I just get completely focused on what I'm doing, or listen to music or whatever. And same with cooking. I'm very focused on what I'm doing, and it doesn't allow me to be in my head about anything else. And so I was thinking that all I wanted to do was just get home from the walk, and I wish I could just cook, but I can't because I need to do work like most people. And so I texted him. I was like, I think it's time that we start the food truck. Let's start the food truck so that cooking is both, I don't know, they say don't turn your hobbies into your career, right? Isn't there a saying like that? I feel like there's something that's like that, because then you'll end up hating your hobby if it becomes actual work, which I can see the value in that. I'm getting too deep into this conversation already, I can tell. But anyways, I was interested if anybody who listens has a food truck, whether it doesn't have to be here in Tucson. I mean, if it is here in Tucson, awesome. I'd love to talk to you, because we started looking into kind of the, potential costs and what you have to do, licenses and all those types of things. And there's obviously a lot. And I don't know, I'd just be interested to know what that journey is like. If there's anybody who currently or in the past has owned and operated a food truck. Kind of random, but if you have, please, and you'd be willing to let me pick your brain for a minute, please reach out. I'd love to know. Okay, that's it. I have like 7 other things written down that I wanted to talk about, but I feel like those are all bonus things. So we're going to switch gears from my blabbering and jump back into the Austin yogurt shop murders. And I feel like it's fair to say this from the beginning. This is going to be a part 2. There's at least one more part. I think we've done episodes that are 3 parts, maybe not. Maybe they've only ever been 2 parts. I'm going to try and keep this to 3. I think I can, but we'll see. But so that nobody gets to the end of this and is like, damn it, I wanted to know what happened, which I'm sure nobody is. Just in case, this is part 2. There is no conclusion at the end of this episode. Okay, so just to kind of refresh, I think last week we left off, I had read a direct excerpt from the book Who Killed These Girls by Beverly Lowry. And kind of, it was a very, to me, disturbing excerpt but very well written, that kind of documented exactly how each girl was positioned and what, looked like, their bodies basically. And so again, the girls were Jennifer and Sarah. They were sisters. Eliza was one of their friends and also worked at the yogurt shop. And then Amy was Sarah's friend. And the two of them had gone to the mall and then come to the yogurt shop to help Eliza and Jennifer close up. And then they were all going to have a sleepover. And so I believe that the last episode ended where I mentioned that Detective Jones, who was the homicide detective put on this case, he knew pretty immediately that he needed help, and he reached out for help from ATF, FBI, Texas Department of Public Safety, like right there on the scene that first night. And yeah, so that's I think where we were. And I'm going to start this episode just to put you back in the headspace of this horrible, horrific murder scene with another direct, very short, but direct quote from that book, Who Killed These Girls. And it says, "The real horror, beyond the unspeakable condition of the bodies, was that the girls had become one with the scene, melted, merged, blackened, and all but indistinguishable from the fallen girders, insulation, and soundproofing tiles, the exploded cans and spilled syrups, the wet black splatters of muck and char, the aluminum ladder missing its top 2 rungs, the metal shelves along the south wall, softened into swooping hammocks as if made of candle wax." Like, what a good writer she is. So descriptive. So just to kind of put us back in the scene of this terrible, these girls have been murdered. And then the whole yogurt shop has been set on fire. So I'm sorry, I was just reading something that I wrote to intro this part 2, and I think it gives too much away. I'm not going to read it. So we are going to talk about what happened in the days, weeks, and months following this horrific crime that occurred on December 6th, 1991. So Jones had asked for help, and I thought this was very interesting. In a memo to the DA's office, he described the situation as, quote, "robbery and sexual assault and multiple child victims and bondage and gunshot wounds and fire, heat, smoke, water damage and no known witnesses equals the homicide, arson, and DA's worst nightmare." And it wasn't and. He said robbery plus sexual assault plus multiple child victims plus bondage, etc. So the Austin arson investigator estimated that the fire had been started near the top of the south wall in the storage room, so the back room where all the girls were found. He determined the fire had likely begun around 11:42, approximately 39 minutes after Eliza had rung up a no-sale transaction. Remember, she had run up a no-sale transaction right, I believe, after the shop closed. Yes, at 11:03 p.m. So 13 minutes after the door was locked and 3 minutes after the shop was actually officially closed, which is strange, to say the least. And the arson investigator determined that the killer or killers had ignited the fire using paper plates, cups, and cardboard that they found at the yogurt shop, soaked in lighter fluid. So don't know at this point, is the lighter fluid something that was also found at the scene, or did they bring that, they or the killer bring it with them? Because if they didn't, then that indicates that this was kind of a spur of the moment fire. It wasn't something that they had planned out. So pretty quickly, as quickly as the next day after this quadruple murder, Detective Jones and his colleagues created a list of pieces of evidence that they were going to hold back from the public. And there are various reasons. Sometimes the evidence is too disturbing, but often it's that they either they don't know enough about it yet, or they don't want to tell the public, because if anybody does come forward, like if they very specifically leave evidence, I feel like I don't need to explain this. Most people probably know this, but just in case, that if they hold some details back, that way if somebody comes forward and confesses, or if somebody is questioned and mentions one of these details that has not been made public, then you know that they were involved, right? Okay, we've all seen that a million times in movies. So these are the 13 pieces of evidence that they decided to not tell the public about, at least right initially. And so it was how and where the fire started, the fact that there was the key in the front door, how much money was taken from the shop, how the girls' bodies were arranged, because remember, 3 of them were stacked kind of like on top of each other almost, what was used to bind the girls, the fact that the office at the yogurt shop was not entered, the fact that the key to the office was still under the cash register, the caliber of the weapons used to, the girls were shot in the head, a .22 and a .380. The fact that 2 pairs of the victim's underpants were missing. Amy's leather bomber jacket that she had on was missing. The fact that Amy had a bruise under her chin from some type of blow, some type of blunt force trauma. The fact that Amy was strangled and what she was strangled with. And the fact that Amy was shot twice with 2 different caliber guns. All the other girls were only shot once, which was still a confusing, they didn't have an answer as to why for a lot of this, but this was not going to be shared with the public initially. So next, Detective Jones issued a press release, very straightforward, said that bodies of 4 young women were found behind the I can't believe it's yogurt shop. All the victims had gunshot wounds to the head and suffered severe burns from a fire. And after that, he had the unfortunate task of having to go and speak with the girls' families. So he met with all of them. They all came down to the main police station. He met with all of them and gave them kind of a preliminary overview of what they knew at that point. Of course, the families were distraught and had questions. They wanted to know if their daughters died quickly, which they were told yes. And they wanted to know if any of the girls were raped, which Jones explained that was still being investigated, to be determined. And Barbara, who was mother to Jennifer and Sarah asked if her daughters were close to each other when they were killed and if any part of their bodies hadn't been burned. And he was honest. He, explained that no part of Jennifer, Sarah, or Eliza was unburned. Only Amy had some parts of her body that were not burned. So over the next few days, they began interviewing people. Students and teachers from the high school were interviewed. Flowers, plants, stuffed animals, notes, cards. It was, were all put in front of the yogurt shop as tributes to the victims. There was a candlelit vigil that took place. And just to add to kind of the awful, unsettling, kind of dark feeling that had settled over the city at this point, El Nino was approaching. On Monday, December 9th, the Austin Police Department issued a nationwide dispatch requesting information on similar crimes from other, police departments. And so in that request, they did share a bit of information. This is, again, it's not a press release, not to the public. This is to other detectives, police departments nationwide. And so they shared that the weapon was a small caliber gun, and the fire they believed was set to cover the crime of the 4 murders. They included information that materials found at the store were used to both bind the victims and start the fire. There was no evidence of forced entry, and that they believed more than one person was involved. And the front door was locked, but the back door was open. And by that night of Monday, December 9th, so it's just a couple days after the murders, a few more advances were made. So an agent found a .380 shell casing, the one that was used to shoot Amy the second time, in a drain under the main sink. And VICAP got back to Austin Police Department about this nationwide kind of requesting information on similar crimes. And they said that their analysis found no crimes in the database matching the case involving the 4 young girls who were stripped, bound, gagged, arranged, and burned. They left out of that also shot. And VICAP, I didn't know what that stood for. I know I've heard that on crime shows. It stands for the Violent Criminal Apprehension Program, and it's a unit of the United States FBI responsible for the analysis of serial, violent, and sexual crimes. So an FBI agent spoke to Detective Jones that day and basically was like, good luck. If this isn't solved within the next week or 2, maybe 3, you're going to need a lot of luck, because this is just going to get harder. Again, we talked about this on the last episode, part 1, that solving a crime is already very difficult. I'd imagine. I have not done it. But when, 98% of the evidence and DNA and fingerprints and all of that is destroyed due to fire, and then due to that fire being put out, it becomes exponentially harder to solve, obviously. So on Tuesday, December 10th, a detective, Andy Waters, with the Austin Police Department, he often helped to communicate updates to the public, and he informed the Statesman, the newspaper there in Austin, that they believed more than one person was involved in the killings. And he kind of gave a warning in this article to the perpetrators who were still on the loose out there, that burning the shop didn't destroy evidence as they had hoped. That he basically was saying, we know that you probably burned the shop, whoever did this, to destroy evidence, but you failed. We still have evidence. That wasn't necessarily true, but he was saying that to kind of provoke potential perpetrators to come forward to be like, no, you didn't. Yes, the fire destroyed it all, He also revealed things that came from that initial list of items they were going to keep from the public. That list that I read of the 13 things they weren't going to tell the public, it was revised it had to be revised many times as this case was investigated. And this is one of those times, because he also revealed in this article that Amy was shot twice while the other girls were only shot once. And he also shared that they believed the motive was robbery. So at this point, it's several days past, information is slowly leaking out, which inevitably means that rumors are also beginning to spread. Now, the cops didn't see this as necessarily a bad thing, or not totally a bad thing, because they were hoping that some of this information wouldn't be just rumors, that maybe it was true and that it would make its way back to them. On the other hand, this wasn't great, because more information out there, more rumors spreading, means that people who were looking for attention and were going to come forward to confess because they wanted attention, it meant that they had enough details to kind of come up with believable confessions, which if they weren't real confessions would just waste the detectives and investigators' time. And that is something that I still find it blows my mind. On Monday, if you listen to the bonus, I mentioned 2 true crime documentaries I watched on Netflix this past weekend. And one of them involved a lot of false confessions or coerced confessions. And I must have said it 50 times while we were watching and annoyed the shit out of Mark. But I couldn't wrap my mind around that. I don't care how long you keep me in a room and question me about something. If I did not murder somebody, I'm not going to admit to murdering somebody. I mean, first of all, I'm not going to say anything. I'm going to say lawyer and nothing else. But if I were so dumb as to not ask for a lawyer and was just going along with this questioning, I feel like I don't care. Maybe if you're going to cut off my limbs, maybe then, yeah, torture me, I guess. But just sitting in a room, I understand you're exhausted, you're hungry, you're thirsty. I still find it's very confusing to me to understand. So if anyone listening has a great example of that will make this more digestible to me, because a false confession I just don't get. Anyways, so all this information, rumors spreading around Austin, it can also be a detriment to the investigation, because people who want attention and are going to give a false confession, they can make it sound really real. So again, this is why Austin Police Department had to continually adjust that list of information that they were keeping confidential from the public. Also on Tuesday were the girls' funerals, and APD recorded the funeral services in case, one of the perpetrators is used a lot in these articles and in this book. I keep wanting to say unsub. So if I say perpetrator, unsub, I'm talking about the same thing. The killers, whoever they may be, in case they attended out of, curiosity or pride. Sometimes killers will attend their victims' funerals because they're so proud of what they did. Disgusting. They also had undercover officers regularly surveilling the graves. 3 of the girls were buried all next to each other, and 1 was not. And this is one of those instances where I learned a lot more about the funerals and the girls' burials, and I want to share it, but I feel like that's for the bigger deep dive. So we're going to keep going. So during these early stages of the investigation, Jones and his team, the other police officers, one of the first things they wanted to do was locate and interview customers who had been at the yogurt shop on the day of the murders. So if anyone had been there that day at all, they wanted to know if they had noticed anything unusual, any strange people, anything like that. And according to Jones, several customers who were there that day did recall seeing two men who appeared kind of out of place, sitting in there just before closing time. Most of the people who reported seeing these men said that they didn't think they had any frozen yogurt. They only had a drink, and that they were talking really closely to each other. And they just looked weird. They just looked suspicious. Now, that's not reliable, as we all know. Like, somebody can look suspicious and be totally innocent of anything. But fine, it was a lead. And it was a lead that went nowhere. Like, there was really, yes, everybody had kind of an idea of what they looked like, but there was no real hardcore description of them, no names, no nothing. That went nowhere. Another thing that was done early on in this investigation was looking into the girls, looking into Jennifer, Sarah, Eliza, and Amy. Investigators were hoping that maybe something in their personal lives would indicate or point to a suspect, somebody they had a problem with, anything. And so Jones is said to have assigned the most skeptical detective that he knew in homicide to go and investigate the girls' homes and bedrooms and just looking for anything at all. Drugs, secrets in a diary, a boyfriend they had problems with, anything at all. Somebody, at work that had been bothering them. But when this detective returned, he reported back and he said, quote, "Those girls were spotless. They earned good grades. They had aspirations of college, and they fit this perfect, wholesome image of like a middle-class Texas girl who loved their family, animals, George Strait, Garth Brooks, and all things Western." That's a direct quote. So police are also now trying to compile a list of people to speak to. I don't want to say suspects yet, but at this point, really, everyone's a suspect. So family members, everyone from family members, classmates, drifters, homeless people in the area, co-workers, people who worked in the strip mall, everyone. And one person that they were interested to talk to was Eliza's ex, because remember, I mentioned this in the last episode, that during she was covering for somebody doing a shift. This was the night before the murders. Her ex-boyfriend, Roger Kurduka, had a friend that was prank calling the shop, asking Eliza to explain all the yogurt flavors, and she could hear Roger laughing in the background. She was super, super annoyed by it. And now I don't know how police knew about this. Maybe Eliza mentioned it to her family that night, or a friend the next day at school. But they were interested to talk to this ex-boyfriend because they thought, well, maybe he's a suspect. Again, wasn't saying much because pretty much everyone was a suspect. So on December 14th, about a week later, APD homicide responded to the stabbing and death of a father and son who were each stabbed over a dozen times in South Austin. And because this was such a brutal crime, very different, knife as opposed to gun, there was no fire involved in these stabbings, but both were very brutal. Detectives thought, well, okay, these are not that far apart, brutal, violent murders, maybe they're connected. Unfortunately, they weren't. The killer ended up being a roommate of this father and son who had robbed a bank earlier that day, and they connect him through his license plate. He had the knife on him. He was guilty of this. But for December 6th, he had a solid alibi and was ruled out as a suspect. So it's December 14th. We're not quite 2 weeks. We're about a week-ish past, when these murders occurred. And the entire city is just panic stricken at this point, like terrified. Because remember, back in 1981, Austin was, and may still be today, I actually don't have the crime statistics for today, but it was, for the size that it was back then, about 500,000 people, maybe a little less. It was considered one of the safest cities of that size. Other cities that were, slightly bigger, slightly smaller, but around the same size, like Fort Worth, Cleveland, and New Orleans, had far more murders that year already. Fort Worth had 180, Cleveland had 183, and New Orleans had 313, whereas Austin had 52. So it was considered a relatively safe city, but the murder of these 4 girls that was unsolved, the stabbing and other murders that occurred, sure, they were scary and terrible and tragic, but most of them very quickly had a suspect in custody. And this was an especially brutal quadruple murder with no real people of interest yet. So on December 20th, 1991, 5 inches of rain fell that day. Remember I said El Nino was coming in, and it came in. I believe it came in actually December 18th is when the rain started, and it did not stop until, I believe, right after Christmas, because by Christmas Eve, over 14 inches of rain had fallen, which broke the previous record of rainfall in 1944 in Austin of about 6 inches. So the lake there, Lake Travis, was like reaching its limit. Around 10 people had died in flash floods, and the governor had even requested federal disaster relief. The Weather Service was calling the storms completely catastrophic. And this may sound irrelevant, but basically everything was flooding. There was water everywhere, and that included something called Shoal Creek, which is where APD thought maybe, because it was nearby the yogurt shop, maybe the murderers had tried to dispose of their weapon, like thrown the gun there. But because of all the flooding everywhere and just all kind of the panic and damage, this was causing the city, the police department was like, well, there goes our chance of finding the murder weapon if it was disposed there, because it's been carried out somewhere else at this point. So on December 29th, 1991, the rain had subsided, and Detective Jones was only focused on this case. He is now not focused on anything else that's happening, just this. And so he followed up on December 29th on a tip that the police department got about a man named Cornelius, who allegedly had been going around bragging about killing a bunch of white girls. He was apparently a known drug dealer. He was a former member of the LA Crips. And so Detective Jones had him brought in. But very quickly, he had an alibi for December 6th. That alibi was confirmed, and he was let go. Detective Jones is very frustrated by now. Now we're at the end of December, and then by January 3rd, Detective Jones wrote a very detailed memo to Police Chief Jim Everett. He wanted to update him on the investigation that had been going on for almost a month. So he informed him that the tips that they had been getting initially were 50 to 75 tips per day for probably the first 2 weeks. Now it was around 10 per day. His other homicide detectives were re-verifying all these tips to make sure that they hopefully didn't miss any leads. But any leads that they had gotten had been ruled out because either the people had alibis or the people who were confessing, which there were several, they only knew details that were released to the public. They knew nothing else and their stories just fell apart. They had interviewed everyone who had been shopping in that shopping center, that strip mall that day. All customers that day at the yogurt shop, especially very closely interviewing the ones between 8 p.m. and closing. All area bus drivers, all the victims' families and boyfriends. They also reviewed local phone calls from the previous 30 days with the yogurt shop, any traffic any traffic tickets issued that evening of December 6th, and the videotapes of the girls' funerals. The FBI's behavioral analysis unit, it's actually called in Austin, or in this story, the behavioral science unit, which I was like, is that right? Because, Criminal Minds, they're the behavioral analysis unit, the BAU. But here they refer to them as the behavioral science unit. So they did create a personality profile of the offenders, which I'm going to tell you about in a moment. And they had arrived in Austin earlier that day, I believe on January 3rd, to discuss their findings, to discuss media strategies, and to hopefully lure the perpetrators out. Jones also noted in this memo to the police chief that the victims' families were cooperating with anything that the police needed, and they seemed to still trust the police department, but that obviously their frustration was growing. We're about a month in. 4 girls, they lost their daughters. I don't need to explain that. But one of the things that he addressed heavily in this memo was that one of the biggest issues he was having was manpower. He told the chief that he, quote, needs at least 4 investigators totally dedicated to this case, and this case only, for at least 60 days or until it is solved, whichever comes first. So Chief Everett agreed, announced that they were creating a task force to help solve these yogurt shop murders. And Sergeant Jones, I've been calling him detective, it's actually Sergeant Jones, was given the, lead to put this task force together however he sees fit. And it included representatives from the Austin Police Department, Austin Fire Department, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, the FBI, the Texas DPS Intelligence, Travis County Sheriff's Office, and Travis County DA's Office. Obviously, their goal, as they stated, was to identify, arrest, and prosecute the killers by conducting an in-depth examination of the crime. And the behavioral science unit was going to use its database of 10,000 murders to continue to develop a personality profile on the offenders to the best of their ability. And then present this profile to the public. So after meeting with the behavioral unit for like an entire day, Sergeant Jones and his team were feeling confident, and Jones gave an interview to the Statesman, the newspaper, saying that the behavioral science people, quote, helped us focus, sift through, and evaluate the case, and that things were looking really positive now. He said he didn't think that the current situation they were in would drag on much longer. And he said, quote, it would be safe to say an apprehension is imminent. We are confident about what happened today. And at a press conference not long after this article came out, Jones shared the FBI profile. And this is so fascinating to me because this is a pretty detailed profile. Now, I'd be interested to hear what you guys think. Like, is it detailed enough? Does this rule anyone out, really? Aside from age and gender and stuff like that? Because I read it and I was like, oh, it's so detailed. And then I thought, well, I don't know, this could really be anybody. So here we go. Here is the FBI profile. They said that more than one person was involved, and one of the people involved had a dominant personality. They said the assailants are probably white, in their late teens to mid-20s. The one with the dominant personality probably didn't finish high school, when this person was in school, they would have been called an underachiever, less than average grades, resents discipline, maybe had discipline problems at school, likely had an explosive personality, would get angry really easily, and even more so when drinking or using drugs. This dominant person likely was impulsive, commits acts without considering consequences, engages easily in physical confrontation, but only when he has the advantage, and will not engage in any confrontation with other males unless his friends are present. Likely unemployed or working a menial job, will have a history of changing jobs, is not a dependable employee, and has a high degree of absenteeism. Likely lives in a dependent relationship with an older person, possibly a parent. Frequents the area of the yogurt shop and is familiar with the streets and stores in the area. Likely is a resident of the neighborhood. Probably has a criminal record. May be abusive to women. May seek out women who are younger and less adequate than himself. Has no remorse about killing the victims, but is under tremendous stress from fear of apprehension because the crime may not have gone as planned. He is also likely very concerned about the loyalty of his accomplice or accomplices because they may be feeling regret. And so this disharmony may be developing between the offenders. Stress levels and paranoia are rising. And because of that, they have to maintain close contact with each other in order to kind of keep a close watch on each other. And over time, this kind of plan to keep a close watch on each other may fail and lead to a falling out or violence. So that all of what I just read is just about the dominant personality, which I guess is the person that they can determine the most about. These next two are about everyone. It says that they said that immediately after leaving the crime scene, all of the offenders would have gone to a secure location to clean up or change clothes, although the crime scene does not indicate they would have had a lot of blood on them. And offenders may have returned to the area that night to watch police and fire departments, or they may have left town and missed some days of work. So that's the profile that was shared with the public. And it does have a lot of detail, but in my opinion, which no one asked for, like I'm thinking back to high school, if I can get my feeble brain to go back that far in time. And I went to a very large high school. So in my graduating class, I had, 1,200, 1,300 kids, maybe more. I think there were a lot of people like this. Hated school, hated authority, had been in trouble with the law a few times, worked a menial job, lived with one parent or an uncle or something. Kind of just, I hate to say it, but kind of like a deadbeat at that point in time, at least. So I don't, late teens to mid 20s, there's a ton of people who could fit this description. But I don't know how, I don't even know how they came up with this, truthfully. Those are my thoughts. So 8 weeks into the investigation now. Now we are 8 weeks into the investigation. The task force is still interviewing customers, employees, re-interviewing them. Sergeant Jones has continued to maintain a strong rapport with the victims' families in order to help ensure their cooperation. They're hoping that none of the families speak to the press because they want to keep, Sergeant Jones and the task force want to keep the messaging and the information that goes out to the public very specific and streamlined. And they, based on the intelligence of the FBI and all the other people involved in this case who know exactly what to release and what not to release, so on and so forth. So he's working really hard to maintain these good relationships with the families so that the families don't go to the press on their own. And also so the families hopefully don't file like a lawsuit, a civil lawsuit against the police department, which they definitely could do. But he is juggling so many things. You know, he's managing, he's dealing with the families. He's dealing a bit with the press. He's managing paperwork for a database of 600 names, suspects, tips, witnesses, customers, law enforcement, like everybody at this point. So apparently IBM and CompuAdd donated equipment to help with this investigation, which helped kind of manage the workload. You know, computers, remember back in 1991 were, I don't remember a computer from 1991. They weren't what they are today. Let's just say that. You know, so that was helping to manage the workload, but he still had at least 50 witnesses left to interview. He still hadn't been able to take affidavits about the girls' clothings or daily routines, like learning. You know, he sent that suspicious homicide officer to the house to like look through their stuff, but they hadn't even really dug into the girls' lives wholeheartedly yet. And this is 2 months into the investigation, but that's because this was I would imagine, because it was such a huge undertaking and so many tips and so much information that they're sifting through, and following up on that is extremely time consuming. And he didn't even have like a real task force until a month into this. So needless to say, they still had a lot to do. They were not completely like caught up where it's like, oh, we've done everything and we don't know where to go from here. They're playing catch up constantly. And so to kind of help manage this, Sergeant Jones requested a larger workspace with offices, conference rooms, specific phone and tip lines. Like he wanted a dedicated area just for this investigation. And by February 1st, he had all of that. Yet they seemed no closer to solving this. Oh man, this has already been going an hour. Whew. Okay, I'm going to do a little bit more and then we will save the rest for next week. So, even though by February 1st they seemed no closer to solving this, I did intentionally skip over somebody that was a suspect early on in this investigation. In fact, it was about a week after the investigation. I want to tell you a little bit about this suspect before we end for today. So, again, by February 1st, they have around 600 suspect names that they're looking into. I read in several articles that this later increased to 1,200, and some articles even claimed 5,000 suspects. One of those suspects very early on was a 16-year-old boy named Maurice Pierce. He was enrolled at McCallum High School, different high school than the girls, but he almost never went, and nobody in his family apparently seemed to care. So on December 14th, Maurice decided to go to the local mall with a loaded .22 pistol in his left jeans pocket and 16 extra rounds in his other pocket. He had apparently taken this gun from a friend, 13-year-old Johnny Holder, who stole it from his dad's collection. So Maurice had his shirt untucked to cover up the gun. He took his dad's car keys to the pristine 1985 Ford LTD and left his apartment. He wasn't alone. In addition to the .22 caliber gun, which, if you recall, is the same caliber that was used in the yogurt shop murders, he also had his 15-year-old friend, Forrest Wellborn, with him. And when the two were at the mall, it didn't take long for either another kid at the mall that they knew to notice the gun, or knowing a 16-year-old boy walking around with a gun, Maurice probably showed, was showing off to other kids. And after he showed off to the wrong kid, this child who apparently went and informed an off-duty cop, Malcolm Wilson. Malcolm Wilson had also been present on the scene at the yogurt shop murders. So this kid sees that 16-year-old Maurice is strolling around the mall with a .22 in his pocket, goes and tells an off-duty cop. This off-duty cop finds Maurice and Forrest in a store, takes the gun, takes the ammunition, and takes them to the security office. In the .22, Maurice had 3 rounds in the chamber. And when Wilson asked him, like, why did you bring a loaded gun to the shopping mall? I mean, I feel like the first question is, why do you have a loaded gun? But sure, fine. Why did you bring it to the shopping mall? Maurice apparently shrugged and said, just to carry it. So Wilson contacted APD and arranged for Maurice and Forrest to be brought to juvenile detention. They were arrested. The policeman arrived, charged Maurice with unlawful possession of a weapon, and brought both boys in. So one of the detectives working on the yogurt shop murders heard of this arrest and this kid who was carrying a .22, and he was like, I want to interview these boys immediately. And so the gun and ammunition were placed in APD custody, and this detective, Hector Polanco, interviewed Maurice. Apparently Maurice told Polanco that his .22 might have been the gun used in the yogurt shop murders, and that Forrest, his friend, might be the shooter. And Polanco's like, why would you say that? Maurice said, well, the night of the murders, Forrest and I were hanging out, went to some place called The Fungus, and they were hanging out with a group of skinheads. These are Maurice's words. Around 10 or 10:30, and these skinheads were led by, their leader was called Mace, was his name. And Maurice said that at some point, Forrest borrowed Maurice's .22, left with the skinheads, and then came back later, and the gun had been fired 6 times. Forrest had a scratch on his neck, and he smelled like hairspray. So this is what Maurice is telling this detective, Polanco. Polanco's kind of like, I don't know. This doesn't sound super reliable or realistic. Like a group of skinheads, the police would likely know about a group of skinheads that is just operating in town. Nonetheless, he decided to continue questioning Maurice. So he asked Maurice, where were you earlier in the night? Maurice said, well, I was babysitting for my sister, and then I also was hanging out with 2 other guys, Rob Springsteen and Mike Scott. And Rob Springsteen and Mike Scott lived together in a condo, and they were brought in then for questioning. They came in, no problem. No, they didn't try to resist. They weren't freaking out because they had really no idea what was going on, or so they said. And what they really didn't know was that at the exact same time that they were being brought in for questioning, Maurice was being wired by an ATF specialist because they wanted Maurice to go talk to Forrest, talk to Springsteen and Scott after they were brought in, and get a confession. And I think we'll leave it there. I was trying to pick like a really cliffhanger-y type point, and I had a few picked out, but I think we'll leave it there. So I can't believe this has already been, I talked for like 10 minutes in the beginning, but this is essentially an hour-long episode, and there's still so much more to this case. So I will do my best to wrap it up in part 3 next week, and I want to say it'll be out Tuesday, but who knows, guys? It may be Wednesday. It may be Monday. I also think, well, maybe I'll put the mini crime story out tomorrow. I don't know. We'll see. Anyways, that's it. That's where we're ending today with these suspects, potential suspects, and we'll see where it goes next week. So thank you, as always, for listening, for supporting me, I noticed that like a handful, I don't want to say a lot because I don't know what that indicates, a handful of people have either tried Patreon for free or joined it, which I love, is really wonderful. I really like our little Patreon community. I guess if it keeps growing, I can't say little. Although, like I said, Jim has like 1,500 patrons. So I feel like, I don't know, we have like 20. So that's, I can still say our little Patreon community. Yeah, if you just can't get enough of my just life babbling, I will say there's not more true crime on Patreon. Patreon is just more of me. Sorry. Anyways, but yeah, thank you guys so much for listening, for supporting me, supporting the show, putting up with all of the ups and downs and backs and forths, and and for putting up with me apologizing at the end of every single episode, because I can't seem to stop doing that. Yeah. And thank you to Lori, left a really nice comment on the episode that I put out Monday, which I titled, "This episode is not good," because it wasn't. And to Derek, I got an email from that I will respond to today for reaching out. Just really nice. Really, everybody's so supportive. So I wish I could support you in the same way that you guys support me. I don't know how to do that, but I appreciate all of you so much. I'm really bad at goodbyes. Even when it comes to the podcast. So I'm just going to say bye. I got to get to work on some stuff for Jim. I love you all. Thank you for listening. Please excuse, I don't know what, everything that I may have said incorrectly or annoyingly on this podcast. And yeah, I will be back with a mini crime story either tomorrow, or I might just save it for Monday. Okay. Love you guys. Send me an email, leave a voicemail, try our Patreon. Leave us an Apple review. We don't get them very much anymore. But we did just get one the other day that was like, it said something like, "You're doing just fine," which I really appreciated. So anyways, thanks guys. Thank you. And talk to you soon. Bye.
Death by Southwest is hosted by Jenna Schneider and Margot Carmichael.
Executive produced by Margot Carmichael.
Produced by Jenna Schneider.
Audio editing and sound design by Margot Carmichael.
Music by Soundstripe.
And a special thanks to Edward R. Murrow for letting us borrow his famous sign-off phrase, "Good night and good luck."